Aloha mai kako. Mahalo Craig for that introduction, and I'm very excited to be here today. So again, I'm going to start off with the title, In Community with Our Shared Place, A Teacher's Journey. Again, my name is Whitney Aragaki. My pronouns are she, they. I teach at Waiakea High School on Hawaii Island, and those at the bottom is my contact information. Let's see. I should be able to move my screen. And I'm lagging. That's okay. Okay. So before we get started today, thank you for being here on your lunch break, potentially, or at this time around a little bit afternoon. And if you could take a few moments to think about a place that has shaped you. Sometimes they're happy moments and sometimes they're not as happy, but there's so many places that have shaped me over the course of my professional and personal life. For example, Alaska, where I did my science research as a high schooler, the local swimming pool where I spent nearly every morning and afternoon as a competitive swimmer from the time I was 5 through eventually through college, and my first classroom. And that image, I'm so happy that I documented the first agendas that I had ever written as a classroom teacher at Hilo Intermediate School. When I ask my own children what places have shaped them or what do they think about places that we have gone as a family to fish and to be together in some outdoor space. So that is the Hilo break wall. And also they think of the place where we eat breakfast, which is our favorite meal of the day. And we don't nearly spend enough time there, but on weekends, seldomly we have that time together. Place is so important, and it's something that I'm going to continue to refer to throughout this entire conversation, or I'm hoping is a conversation. And so I bring forth my place that feeds me. The ahupua'a o Waiakea, moku o Hilo, moku puni o Hawaii. These places where I am from, the area of Waiakea where I've grown up, where I've been taught as an elementary, middle, high schooler, where I now teach, where I now live with my family, in the moku of Hilo, and Hilo is the larger context on Hawaii Island. These places mean so much to me, and I recognize that there have been generations of stewards, the Kanaka Maoli, Kanaka Oiwi, who have demonstrated for us how to live sustainably in this tropical space. As a biologist, I recognize the issues that climate change has wrought on our island and our world. And also as a Japanese settler, I recognize my positionality as someone who can trace back their genealogy to a boat that brought my ancestors over to Hawaii, and yet also recognition that we came over prior, or because of the plantation trade, because of sugarcane, and because of American capitalism. There's so many nuances to that as well. Now, if you see how I'm dressed, I am not currently in Hawaii. Instead, I am in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I've spent the week here learning about how other people view place, and I'm so grateful to the lands that I'm standing on here. I'm occupying right now, of the Shawnee, of the Cherokee, of the Osage, of the Seneca Iroquois, of Miami, Hopewell, and Adena, and the tribes that have sustained these lands and individuals and communities that we need to learn more from. I've also learned a lot about the experiences of Muhammad Ali and Breonna Taylor in this space. So I bring forth all that knowledge with me today. As Craig said, I've had a pretty exciting year. And in December of last year, I was named the 2022 State Teacher of the Year for Hawaii. And very soon after, named a National Teacher of the Year finalist, one of 4 in the nation, with my colleagues from Colorado, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. This quickly drew me out of my comfort zone, especially a nice little bubble that I had created since the pandemic, since not traveling and staying on my island and being very much invested in the specific places that I occupy. In doing so, though, what I've recognized is that there is a community out in the nation for teachers that I am still learning about. On the right of the screen, this just a few of the nationally recognized teachers of the year, all of which identify as Asian American and or Pacific Islander. And while I have always tried to unpack my identity as a Japanese teacher during my professional life, I don't think that I pivoted and understood as deeply what it meant to represent the AAPI community on a national stage. In Hawaii, we have this interesting dichotomy in which 25% of our teachers in the Department of Education identify as Japanese ancestry. Yet only about 9 to 10% of our students identify as Japanese ancestry. Now I think about who I teach, and I teach all students, and the largest percentages of those students are of Native Hawaiian ancestry and Filipino ancestry. Yet we pivot that percentage that only about 10% of our teachers are of Native Hawaiian ancestry and about pretty comparably Filipino ancestry as well. So it makes me think, what do families perceive when I stand in front of a classroom, when I am my name is at the top of a roster? What generational knowledge has been produced because of Japanese individuals, and especially Japanese women, who have had power in the Department of Education through classrooms? Yet, when I sit in a national conversation, 2% of our nation's teachers are of Asian American and or Pacific Island ancestry. 2%. There's a common percentage that says that 2% of the teaching cadre is also Black males, but that's now specifying a specific gender. So 2% of the entire nation's teachers is of Asian American or Pacific Island ancestry. So the opportunity and the gift that I have received to represent the nation's teachers on this national stage has been nothing short of humbling and amazing. And hopefully we can rewind back. Sorry, I'm really running on a hotspot, so hoping that this handles. I am a product of the public schools. I am a product of Hawaii Public Schools. I'm a product of the communities and of the families and the environments that raised me. I grew up outdoors with my mom. So my mom is there standing right behind me within this green box. She was a high school biology teacher for nearly her entire profession. And so I got to tag along with her. I got to be that little twerp in the back, what are we doing? Where are we going? And we got to go all over the place. She was that kind of teacher that took students out because she believed that land and that experiences would teach students, that it wasn't her. She was just a conduit for getting students out there. She found grants, she made partnerships with others, and she brought students to these amazing places. This specific place was in Ka'u with the hawksbill turtle hatching program. And I think that's something that's still going on today. But can you imagine, like, now camping out with students? It's just a different environment. And I'm so appreciative to have grown in this space that has allowed me to exist and be myself, but also to thrive. But what I really believed is that somehow making it for myself was not being a part of the teaching profession. Making it was somehow getting out of Hilo, getting off the rock. Could there be something else beyond this? I took my first trip to the East Coast of the United States, and I saw Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I told my mom, that's where I'm going to be. find me there in a few years, not going to be back in Hilo. So I did everything in my power to try to get off the rock. One of those things was to study and do science fair projects so that I could make a name for myself in science. I studied the Pacific golden plover, the kolea, from 6th grade all the way to 12th grade. By the time that I was in 8th grade, I was writing grants with the Hawaii Audubon Society to fund my travel to Nome, Alaska, so that I could follow these birds from their wintering grounds in Hawaii all the way to Nome, Alaska. And this is pre-GIS, GPS kind of mapping, where now we learn that the birds from Hawaii actually fly to Anchorage, Alaska, and the birds that are from Australia and New Zealand actually fly higher up to Nome. Who knows why, but that's what we found later on. But I digress. And that is one of my favorite things, was to be able to travel because I was doing science and because I was able to communicate and share my knowledge about Hawaii and about our animals to a larger audience. I had no idea that this was really setting up a trajectory for my life. Eventually, I would go on to compete and excel in competitions in which it was about science writing, not necessarily science in general. I wasn't great about that. Some of my classmates were, but it was, could I write a story to communicate the essence of this bird or what I was learning? It's not so much the graphs and figures, but it was my story of walking through the tundra in Alaska and juxtaposing that experience to Hawaii that got me far. And I jump a little bit ahead, but I eventually made it to college and went to Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. So I got to the East Coast the way that I thought I was always going to. And I fumbled in my first year of college. I fumbled because I was going to become an engineer. I was going to become an environmental scientist. I was going to go pre-med and pre-law and give myself the world of options. And eventually I found myself falling back into this idea that science and education were two things that I knew very intimately and that I didn't have to try very hard to exist and thrive in. So I'm here pictured with my cooperating teacher. So I did my student teaching in Strathaven, Pennsylvania, with an advanced placement biology course where there were no Black and brown kids except for a smattering of a few Asians who were recent immigrants. You can see on the right side a picture that was taken of me, and just not knowing how to engage in that environment because it was so different from any kind of learning space that I had. But I continued on, I progressed, and I was really fortunate to eventually graduate with a teacher candidate class that was one of the most diverse that we've had in a long time at Swarthmore. Eventually, I've learned that the teaching candidates in this college have become very much more diverse. But looking at the teaching, or the professors, they were not equipped to handle teaching us cultural competence. Having all white professors gave me a lens that was very narrow and gave me a lens that I had to somehow own this power that I had in front of a classroom. And that is the only way to direct information from the teacher to the student. Now, that is entirely opposite from what I grew up in. I grew up in environments in which we learned by doing. We had hands-on experiences and we learned by talking, and the conversations were, no, you need to quiet them down. They need to sit in their seats and you need to captivate them in some way. So they were very impressed with the ideas that I kind of brought forth. Place-based learning. Somehow, if I think back to what I said, I think there's a quote there that instead of mandating that students learn about an oak tree, let's give them a native plant. So that was my first foray into this place-based learning. Now, I know that I was on the right track. I'm kind of still there on this path, but this is definitely just another step in the road. So with all these conversations that I had about place with my professors, they said, well, you'd be perfect for this fellowship. Let's promote you and let's put you up on this minority fellowship so that you can get more accolades for teaching. I said, well, I don't know if I want to be a teacher yet, but this is what I know. And that gave me the opportunity to afford grad school, because this fellowship, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Fellowship for Aspiring Teachers of Color, gave me a fellowship in which I could do anything I wanted as long as I had a teaching certification at the end of it. But check, I had a teaching certification right off of Swarthmore, so I didn't have to go to another MAT program. I could venture to anything in the world. So what I did was I asked my biology professors and I said, hey, I got my teaching certification already. You think I can just go to grad school in biology and try to do something new? And my professor, who was my genetics professor, who I felt that I performed the strongest in college, looked at me and said, well, Whitney, you're from Hawaii. It doesn't look like you do really well in science. You're getting like low A's and maybe some B's. So I don't think you can hack it in grad school. You should just go home. And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean I should just go home? I got into a few schools. Which one should I choose? And he sat me down in his office and said, no, just go home. It'll be better for you there. And I felt very defeated. What do you mean go home? I don't even know that there's a program. Unfortunately, I found that there was a program at University of Hawaii at Hilo for a master's in tropical conservation biology and environmental science. But all the training that I've done up until that point told me that this is a less than program for what I need. No one has told me anything different, that this would be amazing. They just told me that you're not good enough, so go to UH Hilo. And that's the rhetoric that I heard in high school, that if I wouldn't be able to cut it in college, then UH Hilo was my path. So I applied to UH Hilo. I just listened to the advice of my professors and I got in. Okay. But then they gave me a fellowship. They gave me a fellowship with the NSF GK12, which afforded me an entire stipend and paid for all of my schooling, all of my housing, all of my food for the next 4 years. It was entirely a blessing in disguise. In going to UH Hilo, I pursued a path about Native Hawaiians and genetics and propensity to type 2 diabetes. I was like, I got this. Look at this. I'm going to be pre-med still. I can do this. And one of the first courses that my thesis advisor told me to take is that you need to understand what it means to be back in schools, back in Hawaii. It's been so long since you've been there. And if you want to work with children and Native Hawaiian children and type 2 diabetes, you got to learn about children back home. So I took a course. I signed up, first course, Education 600, Dr. Manulani Meyer. Okay, signing up, education for teaching in Hawaii public schools. And I walked in there, I said, I'm ready, I can do this. And she said, you're not ready. You're not going to be enrolled in this class. And I was saying, I did it, I signed up and I paid for it. And she said, no. How much have you taught in public schools? I said, well, I went to the public schools. And she pushed me again and said, what have you done for students? And I said, I don't know, I'm just coming back and gonna learn. She said, go home and read my book, Ho'olu. So I took the book home, read the entire book that night, came back and said, I read the book, I'm ready to go. And she told me again, you're not ready because you read a book in one night and you think you got it. And the picture, we're good now, but that was the first time that someone in Hawaii told me I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't there. And I had been struggling with this imposter syndrome as when am I ever going to be good enough? But really what I had to understand was the theories that Auntie Manu teaches, this idea of new with a parentheses K. What is new to our understanding of knowledge is indeed old. I had to go back to all of those experiences that I had with my mother as my first teacher, with the land as my first teacher, with the experiences that I had growing up in Hawaii, to truly understand what it is that I want to do with my profession and what do I want to do with even my personal life. And it took me the entire semester to even get her to be like, okay, maybe you got this. She was very, very resistant to telling me that I understood it, because it wouldn't serve me to be told that I got it. I need to constantly work at it. I needed to work at it because I needed to humble myself from coming off the continent and coming off of that kind of perspectives of the Ivy League, and humbling myself in terms of that perspective, but also empowering myself to trust that what I understand of knowledge and acquisition and what I understand about education is inherently what I experienced as a child. So this picture was taken like maybe a year after that experience. And Auntie Manu was the one who gave the oration at my wedding. She sat on my thesis committee for my master's degree. She pushed me in many different ways, and I never thought that I would take a biology type of master's degree and turn it into a quantitative and qualitative study where I would do oral histories with individuals who serve Native Hawaiian people in medical and la'au lapa'au, in those fields. And that was probably one of the most life-changing experiences that I've had, that solidifies why my teaching pedagogy is the way it is. So now here, shifting over, that eventually I had to get a job. I couldn't just flounder around in a master's degree. And I started off with a shift in position. I had to really rethink what it is that I teach. How do I teach beyond what I learned in student teaching? Because I had to undo all of that ideas, that I wasn't just the sage on the stage. I wasn't just the one to captivate an audience, but how do I ensure that all students are learning? So while this is not a picture of my old classroom, it's an idea that it shifts in position. That when did I shift in position? That I wasn't just the front person on the stage. But I started off in math. And in math, sometimes we very easily fall back into, this is how you do it. Follow me, and then do it yourself. So I had to learn so many different things in those few starting years. Then once I started learning that profession and getting more comfortable with myself, then it was, how do I shift my perspectives? How do I shift how I believe in empowering students to lead? I want to ensure that students feel that they can stand in front of a class, that they can share their knowledge and share their mana'o, and feel that their lived experience counts. So in order to do that, I had to eventually start leaning into the questions that I had. So how do I do this? How do I ensure that my students are heard, and not only heard, but seen and believed and trusted? So I had to shift my pedagogy, in which students then started coming up with the curriculum. They started figuring out, what do they want to impart on a future generation? This is one of our examples from the Science Buddies program that we did, where high school students created curriculum with our next generation science standards and then taught it to elementary students. They were the ones who took in that knowledge, understood how best to teach kids, because they are kids much more recently than I was, and then imparted back into a pedagogy. And finally, growing into this profession was a shift in power, recognizing that I, as a classroom teacher, was not necessarily the most powerful thing to teach kids, but it is their place. When I can go beyond myself and be okay with losing kind of a power, so that place takes the center stage, then I have really grown into this profession. When I can take kids out to the kipuka and they're able to map the geology of the location, the geography, the climate, the weather, the plants, the animals, the interrelationships and the biology and all these things, this is me growing into that profession. And this is this picture like right before the pandemic. It was so beautiful. But of course, the pandemic hit and we were all stuck at home. And I had just started my PhD program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And luckily for me, it's like a time that I could really just sit and think. and wonder about how my pedagogy had been shifting through these past 10 years of being in the profession. So something that I'd like to bring forward is this work from the Value of Hawaii 3, that when I read Kajihiro and Tengan's 2020, their koa metaphor, everything clicked for me. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it, but I can paraphrase it, and I will do so, but also he's nodding to them, Kyle and Tai. So this is how I view place. Place is our environments, ourselves, and our communities. And sometimes that's like, yeah, I guess so. But the way that Kyle and Tai really articulated this was clear through the metaphor of koa. So koa gives us the idea of where are you? Koa is the foundational tree in our Hawaiian ecosystem. It is one of the tallest trees. It makes up the forest. It provides shade, shelter, food, water to the entire ecosystem. It is a watershed tree on our island, and it is beautiful. Whenever I'm in a koa forest, I can tell when the temperatures decrease. I can tell when the waters feel clearer or the air feels more purified. It's because that's where we are. But koa is also who we are. So koa is one of the main trees within the Hawaiian culture. It's koa as a word means strength, warrior. And look how strong this tree is. It's one of the tallest trees. My son's standing in front of this tree right now. That's just the one that we could access. And it's not even the tallest one in the forest. But when you can carve out canoes, when you can build structures through this wood because it's so strong and durable, it can be used for canoe making. It can be used thus to connect islands, to connect people across this vast Pacific. Koa is who we are. And koa is who we are together. So the metaphor that has been brought up by Kyle and Tai is that a koa seed cannot simply be planted in a forest. So if a seed falls in the forest, it will not grow. It must endure a scarification of some sort, a cut, a gash, some kind of trauma in order for it to grow. Now that is a metaphor, if not anything else, for our students within that pandemic. They all experience trauma. We all experience trauma too. We are stuck at home. Some folks' jobs were on the line. Some people couldn't get food. Some people experienced death very close to them. This is a trauma that we will all carry for the rest of our lives. But like koa, how can we take that trauma and then produce something that is the strongest thing in the Hawaiian forest? So when I look at my sons here, they're just looking, I snapped this photo. And what I realized when I snapped this photo is that there's dead koa in the back. All those tall trees, that's tall stands are all dead. And I had to wonder why. What I found out is that there was a forest fire that went through this place a few years ago, and it wiped out nearly the whole forest. But what did it do? Well, the koa seeds fell and they experienced that trauma of a forest fire. Experiencing that trauma of the forest fire for the seeds allowed them to germinate. So now we have these koa saplings growing from literally the trauma of a forest fire. They will become the new strongest, tallest trees of that forest. The old koa laid the foundation for the new koa to be there, and the forest fire did as well. So that is how we must continue to persevere in our communities and together. So combining all that, what place teaches us is that it is about position, perspective, pedagogy, and power. Place teaches us all of these shifts in our practice. This is how I view place, and when I say place-based learning, this is what I focus on. I'm a PhD student, so got to come through with some theoretical stuff here. But I am proposing an ʻāina aloha framework now for science learning as a place-based educator, as someone who believes in it, yet recognizes that it just isn't something that I have come up with, but it's something that I have been collectively is taught to me through places, peoples, and communities. It is that a science curriculum that I'm building right now is seeking to build student understanding through a worldview that land is alive, has the capacity to love, and is our teacher. Taking Auntie Manu's idea of body, mind, spirit, and the triangulation of meaning, I place this idea of place, space, and time to create a phenomenon of learning, a phenomenon being a play on words of the next generation science standards, in which phenomenon is like the root of these science ideas. So instead of phenomenon being first, it's taking all of that experiential knowledge and growth and putting it into a phenomenon. So this is where I come in with the title of my talk today. The theoretical framing is what I've been sitting with now, kind of after the pandemic, and thinking through, what am I doing now? Like, where's my next steps in understanding my pedagogy? So of a Western perspective of science identity, which I'm focusing on as my study in education, is the ability to develop self-concept relating to science performance and career possibilities. Sorry, can't see that. And that's a science identity. Some people have it, some people have less of it. No one has none of it. But I want to reframe this idea of a science identity for Hawaii as an ʻāina aloha science identity, in which we focus on a sense of belonging and a sense of responsibility rather than performance and career. We focus on how do we situate our sense of belonging in science within the classroom spaces and within a community. And then also having that sense of responsibility, that when you have belonging, you feel responsibility to that place. So how is science learning, how is science knowledge acquisition driven by a kuleana to ohana, community, and ʻāina? Now, you may be thinking, well, yes, okay, I get that. But I also recognize that sometimes I have to be a little bit more introspective to my identities as well. And my identity that I am grappling with my experiences on the continent more recently is that I am of Japanese ancestry. While I am 5 generations past, I identify as Gose. I have been steeped in a culture that has come from Japan. I guess a pre-war, close to imperial Japan culture. And so I have to honor that if I'm going to talk about identity, I'm going to talk about student identity and this identity of ʻāina aloha. I also have to reckon with my own identities. So I went back to the research and I said, okay, so what do Japanese people do when they want to do education or research? I was kind of looking for a method in which to move forward with learning about identity. And lo and behold, nearly every single paper was just like, this is how Western approaches do it. This is a Western approach to this. And I got a lot of books and a lot of readings about how to do research on Japanese people. And I said, oh, that seems very odd. Why aren't Japanese folks really like empowering themselves with their own methodologies? Where did it go? And a lot of it, like we know in Hawaii, like we know on the continent, has been lost to white colonialism. It's been basically just covered up and hidden because it's just easier to do the status quo. So it took me a little while, but I found a theory or a methodology in Japanese urban planning that is called machizukuri. And this is like one of the only methods that I found. So if anyone has any ideas about Japanese methodology, please let me know. But machizukuri really sums it up for me, because it is an urban planning concept that focuses on how to have in conversation with an entire community what shared place looks like. And when I saw that, I said, well, that is exactly what I'm trying to do. That is exactly what my life work is, that we are all working to build community in our shared place. And that is what a science identity research will look like for me as I move forward through this, because it honors the idea that instead of looking west to Western society, I'm looking west geographically. I'm just going to look to Japan and the cultures that, part of the cultures that raised me. So that is why, and Japanese, very similar to Hawaiian, is so good with their metaphors and words. And I can't even fully describe what machizukuri can represent in a theoretical framework, but it's only the beginning for me to start uncovering these metaphors that have been lost because I've lost that language to Japanese culture. But I'm seeing how that method can help me propagate conversations for students as they continue to connect to their own cultures. So an example of how I do this, since I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable, is that I'll show you like this is an assignment that I gave, was it pre-pandemic? An assignment that I gave. I said, appreciating the national parks. Let's appreciate national parks because this is a place, we're engaging in place. I want them to be in their places, but I don't have the wherewithal to take them to every single place in Hilo. So I said, go out and do this. And then the kids came back and were like, oh, it's great. This is so fun. And I think that they were just writing things in order to make me feel happy and to make me feel like I want to give them an A, because they had fun and they filmed TikToks and they took selfies. And after the pandemic and a lot of things had kind of been uncovered about the more so the injustices in the world, and I walked into this Instagram post of why is there so little diversity in the outdoors, it just dawned on me that we're not having the same critical conversations that we could, because I was too focused on having them appreciate their place and not also problematizing their place, not also problematizing not place, but their spaces. How are spaces contrived on our places to either include or exclude people and cultures and communities? So instead, I know this is a lot of words. So instead of a happy selfie guide, students again went out to their places. They went out to the national park again. They went to other places. And I had them identify barriers to the national park. How come not everyone can appreciate the national park the same way that we would think a tourist would? Why do tourists love going to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and we feel it's a chore? Well, they came up with some amazing understandings. They just observed what was happening. The park entrance fee, which is the huge barrier of capitalism and accessibility, race and having representation in the rangers, and all of these things that while they were able to appreciate the place that they were on and it was sacred ground, they also recognized the space in which they were occupying was not made for every person. And that's how we build community in our shared place. And that's just one example. And I know I'm nearly on time, so I'd like to just close soon with like, how have now you've taken that place that you started with in a very meditative pause, and how have these places shaped you? And how will you continue to learn in these places? Learning meaning both appreciation and problematizing spaces that we occupy. And I'd like to close with the 3 questions that I frame every curriculum, every conversation with, is that where are you? Who are you? And who are we together? This is what place can teach us if we're willing to be open to it, if we're willing to accept, and we're willing to accept that these answers cannot come easily, that these are difficult to answer. If we can just answer them very quickly, then we have not done that work. Because for me, every time I engage in a new experience, these answers change for me. Every time I engage in a new place, these answers change for me. And it just helps me grow as a person, as a learner, and as a teacher. I'd like to close with this quote from Antimanu Ulukalelea, because it can't all be hard. we have to create joy in the process, and we have to enjoy our students that are in front of us. We have to enjoy our communities, and we're going to always work to build it better for all of us. Mahalo piha. Thanks so much for being here. That's my Twitter handle and my website if you need to get in touch with me. And thanks.